Hello there, thanks so much for joining me for another video. This is Liz Wright from Liz at Home in sunny South Africa. I'm on to my next video in the Watercolor Wednesdays series, and today I'm going to talk to you all about supplies, and I'm inundated here with watercolor supplies. So without further ado, let me put some of these things, oops, oh my goodness, to the side and start with the simplest things. So some of the things that are obvious is you need water, usually 2 jars of clean water, and then you can keep there's a choice of keeping one for warm colors and one for cool colors, or one for clean water and one for dirty water, so that if you need to put clean water down for anything. And I would suggest that you hop up at least once during your painting session and change your dirty water, because the dirty water does sometimes make the things muddy. It's not essential. You can use any jar. This was from Pickles, actually, and you don't have to take the label off. I did it to be aesthetically pleasing. Then you need paints and watercolor. I'm falling over my words. I must speak slower. Watercolor paints come in two main, they are presented mainly in 2 ways. And the first way is in tubes. This is an ice cream container that I've got a lot of my tubes in. And the tubes come in varying sizes. You don't get huge tubes of watercolor paint. You get sort of, this is the bigger size, and then you get smaller, and you get, where's a small Daniel Smith one? There's a small Winsor Newton core. So you get many different sizes of tube paints, and those present as they're wet inside the tube. I'll show you just now. And then you also get dry paints, which are presented, I don't have room here, which are presented in little pans. These are shiny paints, a small little pan of basic colors, which comes with the little palette, which is quite useful, and a larger pan with many colors, all sorts of different brands. This koi one's a great basic set to get if you haven't got any, because it's a nice palette and lots of colors, and they look not so great, all sort of cracked and everything, but when you're going to paint with paints that are in pans, it is really advisable, you don't have to, but it's really advisable to spray them first and let them activate. I'll show you just now why. Then you need watercolor paper. Again, watercolor paper comes in many formats. You get quite nicely watercolor sketchbooks. This is one I use a lot. It is 300 GSM, the paper, but it's not 100% cotton paper. So the painting doesn't always work exactly as I want it to. I think it doesn't tell you whether it's hot or cold pressed, but I think it's cold pressed. And it's got this kind of a looking texture. It's fine for me when I use it as a sketchbook, so I use it for practicing things and trying things and that sort of stuff. I'm not a professional at all yet. You get inexpensive watercolor paper that is not always watercolor paper. So if you see this, I bought this thinking it was watercolor paper. It says water multimedia pad. acid-free, age-resistant natural white. It's 300 GSM and it's acid-free, but it's not watercolor paper. It doesn't have the watercolor sizing on it. So it's great. I mean, you can use it, but it doesn't have the properties that you're hoping for. You get stuff called rag paper, which is made out of 100% cotton rag. This is often the kind I buy from Amazon, or in South Africa it's made in India by, I think the company is called Khadi, Khadi, and the paper is quite nice. Then you get large sheets of paper, and this is made from 100% cotton. I cut it down small. These are Khadi sheets, the rag paper into a little notebook. This is another piece cut from a large sheet. It's a very large sheet that you can buy. This is 100% cotton paper. I can't remember whether this particular one was Fabriano or whether it was Arches. I know Arches should be pronounced Arche or something, but I am not quite sure of the pronunciation, so I just go with Arches. But it's very good paper. And for me, the most important thing is the paper. Then watercolor paper also comes in hot press, which is great if you're doing drawings or you want to transfer a coloring page onto watercolor paper, because it's fairly smooth, and so you could use watercolor pencils quite nicely on the hot press watercolor paper. This again is a fairly inexpensive brand. It's not 100% cotton. 100% cotton always says 100% cotton because it's much more expensive. This is cold pressed. And then watercolor paper, as I explained in my short little video on the history of watercolor, always has sizing. This is surface sized. Sometimes it's sized throughout, and I'm not actually sure about the difference. But again, this is not saying 100% cotton. Here we have much more expensive Artistico, Fabriano Artistico, 300 GSM, 100% cotton, and I'll tell you right now, it's the same size as this, but it was almost double the price. So those are cold pressed. Then you get rough grain, and I'll show you the rough grain. So they all create slightly different textures. This is cold pressed. Okay, so I'm going to pop those on the ground. Next, you need a little spray bottle with water in. I find baby wipes handy because I'm incredibly messy. You do need either a paper towel, some loo paper, or an old cloth, an absorbent cloth at your side. You need usually a palette of some sort. It can be a side plate, or it can be an actual palette, or it can be the palette that comes with the paints you purchased. So it can be any of those, or it can be a nice porcelain palette, which lasts nicely. These are tube paints that I've squashed into the palette. When you buy, there's another kind of palette that you can buy if you decide to go with tube paints, and that's these palettes, which are quite inexpensive, and you can't take the little pans out, but it gives you nice mixing areas and a place to hold it if you wanted to. And then you get different types, different qualities of paint, and the inexpensive tube paints are quite chalky and end up cracking and breaking, but they still paint. And if you're practicing and you don't have a great budget, I personally don't think there's anything wrong starting with a less grand paint, the thing you should spend your money on is some nice paper and a nice brush or two. So watercolor brushes, I have a large collection here to show you. You get a round brush, and this brand, if you happen to live in the United States, I'm not sure about the UK or Europe, but in the States, I think these are very reasonably priced. The Princeton Snap Brushes, they're quite a firm bristle and they come back into shape and they're round. And I would recommend a larger size, like a 16 or a 14, plus either an 8 or a 6, plus a 2 or something small. So this is a 7, I think. Another great brand for, and I think this is the same in the UK, is Craftomer. They're fabulous watercolor brushes with a beautiful point at the end. And there's a size 2 Craftomer. This one's a little bit stocky. I prefer a slightly longer brush, and I have a different size 2 somewhere, maybe not in this particular collection. But then again, I also just want to say sizes are also deceptive according to make. Usually a 6 is around the size of this size 7. This is a 6. And you can see they're you put them down. They're a very similar size. But this is a different brand. It's Milano. And it's much smaller and finer. So one's not sure. But if you're going for Princeton Snap Brushes, then the 6 is a good size and the 2. The thing with the Princeton Snaps is that this varnish starts to crack, as mine has, and I look after my brushes fairly well and starts to peel off. So they're not high quality brushes, but they are great. Sometimes it's nice to have a biggish wash brush just to put clean water down if you're doing landscapes and wet on wet technique. And you could otherwise go with something that's called a mop brush. This is quite a small one, but it holds the water. All right, next bit of kit that you need is something. It can be the back of a file pad. This is one of those files. I just use the back of it, and some masking tape. You could be using the cardboard back of a pad of paper or anything like that, or something like this. Then you take a piece of your watercolor paper and you take some masking tape or some washi tape or whatever you like, and you fasten that paper to your board, which makes it easier to work with and stops the buckling. It tends to curl up when it gets very wet. If you're just painting simple, I didn't put enough on there. If you're just painting simple little floral wreaths or flowers or something like that, it's not so necessary to tape your paper down. But when you're doing something like a landscape that's going to use a lot of water, then you need to tape your paper down. Then my suggestion for you, if you don't have any watercolor paints yet, is to purchase tubes. And I would suggest you purchase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 colors. A red, so primary colors, a red, a blue, and a yellow, your primary colors, and then a gray and a black. And with that, you can actually create many, many, many colors. I'm going to show you how you can create the colors now in a minute, and I don't want this video to be too long. I think that will be the final thing I show you, and then I'll start on the different watercolor techniques next week. But I wanted to show you why I suggest spraying your paint. I'm going to actually use this fairly inexpensive palette, which is Mungyo. Why I suggest spraying your paints with water a little while before you start. So I'm going to spray this now, just spritz. And leave it for a little bit. I'm going to get my brush. I'm not going to leave it for a long time. I'm going to leave that, sorry, getting myself confused. I'm going to leave that to activate for a while. Then I'm going to take this palette I have that I put together myself of quite expensive paints that I have not spritzed. And I'm going to wet my brush in some water, and I'm going to, let's take a nice green. I'm going to wet the paint, and I'm going to draw something, and you have a fairly nice band of color, but not exciting. Now, if I go to this paint that has been sitting for a short while after being spritzed, I've wet my brush again, and I'm going into that spritzed pan. I just work it off here a moment. And look at the vibrancy of that color. Oh, the fly. It's very hot here today again. So that's hint number 1. Hint number 2 is that you get value. And I'm not talking financial. I'm talking light, medium, dark value when you paint. And you don't need, when you have pencils, you need 120, 130 colors. When you paint, you can go from dark. I'm going again with this green. I often dab it just a little bit to make sure I get rid of excess water, and you get this dark color. Then I'm going into my water jar, dipping my brush in, drying it on my paper towel, and doing some more. Same paint, a little bit less. Still got my brush, dipping it in there one more time, drying it off, and even lighter. And I can go with that same brush, lighter. Let's see how far we can go. So the value gets less and less. You can, if you're now wanting to do a painting and you want more of that color, you can take your color you were using. I'm going to bring my little palette forward. I'm going into this paint. Going to saturate my brush with this. Going to bring it into the palette, and again a few times. Add a bit more water. I want a bit more there. So now I will use the saturated color from there. Then I'm going to make a desaturated color by adding water, 1 drop, 2 drops, and mixing that together, and maybe a bit more, 3 drops. And then I can add some of that to the next well using my brush and make an even less saturated color by adding more water to that. So now let's look and see what we've got. Put the brush on this side. come in to the deeply saturated color. Going to paint there again. Look how rich it is now, because after the spritzing and all this water, it's becoming more and more saturated. Cleaning my brush out, so I'm jiggling it around quite a lot. Jiggle, 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 jiggle. And then I'm going to actually dry it off just a little on my towel so it's not full of water. And I'm going into my medium value with that. Again, just drying it off and going in there. I have a different color paint. Then I'm cleaning my brush again, drying it off a bit, going into the paler one, dabbing a bit of those drops of water off, and I have a different color paint again. If I then want to add something into that and make it look exciting, while that is still wet, I can pop my paint into the dark color, just take it off so it's not too much, and just put a little line and see and play with that a bit. I'm going to dry the brush off a bit more, and you can play and see how it wanders around and does the most amazing things, which to me is magical. Just watch it playing, and it just grows and makes lovely, lovely, seamless little blends. So that is value. And then I'm going to, the last thing in this class is show you how, I was just looking to see what I had there, how to add a tone and a shade. So a tone is when grey has been added to a color, and a shade is when black has been added to a color. So now I'm going to get, this is lovely Arches paper, so it's just doing gorgeous things. Now I'm going to get a less expensive paper, which is my sketchbook, to show you the next playing with color here. I'm going to go on the back of one of my pages, and I want to show you, oops, knocked my light. First I'm going to squeeze out a tiny little bit of red. This is Sennelier Bright Red. Oops. Then I have Sennelier Ultramarine Blue. Ultramarine blue is a very good mixing blue. Sometimes it looks like an oily residue comes out when you, I don't know if you can see that on the blue, when you take your paint out of the tube, and that means the tube's been standing a while and the gum arabic or whatever they're using to bind the pigments together is separating a bit from the pigment. So you can just shake it, and then you can use, this is lemon yellow. Maybe I should just shake it first. And then I have an ivory black and a Paynes grey, but I'm first just going to show you doing the color mixing. So we've got here, difficult to make sure everything's in screen. The red, just want a bit more water on that. There's the red. I need to clean my brush and make sure no red is coming off there. Then I must go to the blue. Ultramarine blue. Clean that off there. Go to the yellow. Whoopsie. I had some blue on and I'm already making green. This is where we need to be very, very careful. Make sure that's clean, and I've got my clean water here. Let me get some more yellow from the other side. That has none of the green in it. Okay, now we're going to mix our colors a little bit. And we're going with the red and the blue. And we're going to get a violet. Quite pretty, and you can turn it into a more blue violet if you want to. Or you can turn it into a more pink. It's not a very nice color that I've made there. It's very red. I'm going to just get some more blue. Got a rich color, so we can make all kinds of colors there. And next we're going to create green, which yellow, because it's so light, is quite a sensitive color. So I just want to use the clean water again, back to the blue and into the yellow. And here we've got quite a dark green because I've got more blue, so sort of a blue aquamarine green. And now I'm going to add more yellow. Going to get a different green and add more yellow and get a nice kind of lemon olive green with these two. So the different colors you use make a difference to your end result, whether they're warm or cool colors, etc. But those are quite pleasant colors. If you wanted to create brown, you take two colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel. So I would take red and green, and I'd get a nice muddy brown with red overtones. Now if I wanted to make tones and shades, I'm putting a teensy weensy little bit of black here. That's black. And a teensy weensy bit of, I've got Paynes grey out. I hope it's not too blue, but we'll see. It's not such a teensy weensy bit, but it's a color I use quite a lot. So it's fine. This is a new one. And now we need our little wet wipe. I'm going to take I think I need some more yellow. Just going to put a clean bit in here. And to make a shade, let's go with, shall we go with the red, which is quite vibrant. We've seen our basic red, just adding some water because plain watercolor paint from the tube is very, very rich. And I'm going to take, I'm confused, just a minute, I need to check in my book again which is the tint and which is the shade. when you add black creates the shade, when you add grey creates the tint. So now we're going to add some black to this red. Just a little bit. It's too much because it's straight from the tube, so I'm going to need more of the red. I'm going to take even some more red. There we are. And here we'll have a red shade. Do you see that? Desaturated color. And now I'm going to take that same red and I'm going to take just a little bit of the grey, but I don't want to take so much. So I'm just adding a bit more water to it. I'm going to put a drop in the red and mix that up. And now we're going to have a tint of the red. We can add a bit more grey. And we get a darker tint. So it's all quite interesting playing with the colour mixing, and it's another one of the joys of watercolour. So now we've seen that we get different values and we get different shades from just a few colours, and I've shown you all the various kinds of ways you can buy watercolour, and that you really, if you can afford to buy one watercolour sketchbook or one watercolour book that you don't mind, that's a bit less expensive, that's not 100% cotton, so you can practice your colour mixing and practice getting colours right and practice brush strokes and things with, and then 100% cotton book later on so that you can see how beautiful your work can be, then I think you're made. If you prefer using something that is already down there, a book which I've shown on my channel before, and she's done more books, is by Dana Fox. I've got this watercolor with me in the forest, and it is printed on watercolor paper. So she gives you these images and she gives you ideas of what colors to use to paint them. So that could be a great way to start your watercolor journey without the fear of drawing. What I've done with this book is actually practiced drawing each thing that that they showed us, and then painting it in here after I'd drawn it and painted it. So that's another idea for you. But now I look forward to seeing you in the next video. So this is Watercolor Wednesdays episode 2 and I wish you a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much for joining me, and if you're enjoying this series and you're finding it helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel, clicking that like button, it really helps me, and possibly sharing the video. Bye-bye now, have a lovely day.